I remember the pitch when I was there was, it's like, hey, hey, restaurant, we have 5,000 people searching for pizza in your area. Don't you want a piece of that, of that search volume? Was that still like what you sold in the early days, and it kind of just scaled that from there? Or were you experimenting with different things you were trying to sell to people?
I mean, gosh, I'll try and remember all the different versions. I mean, before I started, we actually had a pay-per-call product. So that was the original product. And it was like, hey, you're going to pay for calls. It's only performance based. And I think it's sort of a classic example of maybe innovating where you didn't need to quite innovate at the time. I mean, you're basically going from ads in the newspaper, ads in the Yellow Pages, to it's a website, which people weren't really familiar with. People are searching for businesses on the internet. Business owners weren't really familiar with that. And also we're innovating on the ad product, and it's only pay for a call. It was like probably a little bit too much at the time. And what we found was restaurants were more comfortable with this like Yellow Page type thing where they had a set spend that they knew they were going to pay per month, and they were going to get ads for it, and they were going to evaluate the results from it. So we ended up pivoting from the pay per call to like a flat number of ads actually model. And the original product was you would get a certain number of ads. So it wasn't actually pay per click, although they would see how much traffic they were getting, from the product. Over time, we evolved to pay per click. The market was going there with Google and Facebook. But yeah, so it was like a straight ad product. I mean, even at the time, we didn't even have a back end dashboard. So like they couldn't see what they were getting like from the ad product. And then I remember when we built that, we're like, wow, this is amazing. They can see a graph of their traffic and their phone calls and stuff like that. So it was even before that. But yeah, the product was ads, and we would have ads on the top of search, ads on other businesses' pages. And we had a couple things around the listing, like a slideshow of pictures and things like that, which was pretty important to a lot of businesses, and it helped with conversion. But everything was kind of like in the earliest days. I mean, we were actually still faxing over the agreements. So we would fax an agreement, they would sign it and fax it back. So like sitting in the office, when someone heard the fax machine go off, it was like everyone would run over and see like if that was their contract coming back. So it was pretty good.
It's amazing. I know it's hard to remember like the pre-internet days. Today everyone's so used to DocuSign and all of these things, but that was definitely a time where, all right, the world is kind of coming online, and especially these more old school SMBs, are still trying to figure it all out. And I think one thing, you mentioned this a little bit, like Yelp was incredibly successful at building a community around the product, and that kind of drove this network effect, which eventually led to this advertising business that was so strong for Yelp. Can you talk a little bit about how Yelp approached building that marketplace and that supply demand challenge that all marketplaces have?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, listen, I was, the inside sales representative getting hung up on and cold calling into businesses. But I got to see the marketing team in action, and the early marketing team, or, sort of couple people, was really a special group of people. And a lot of innovation was happening on that side of the business, both from a product perspective. I mentioned some of the social networking aspects, parts of the product that drove engagement, but from a marketing perspective, driving and building that community was where a lot of the innovation happened. I think Yelp was one of the first companies to actually do offline events for a website. And like, cause at the time you weren't supposed to meet anybody like that you met online. Like it was like, I was raised, in the AOL era where it was like, do not meet anybody that you meet
weird
on
chat room
AOL.
People. Yeah.
Yes. Very dangerous. Like don't do it. Right. And so, flash forward a few years later, and you're throwing parties and meeting other people in the city of San Francisco, who you met online. And actually in the early days, there was a talk board, and it was very much like what you would see on Reddit today. The talk board was a huge part of the engagement of the community. So essentially, if you think about the audience, you had this audience of people who graduated from college and then moved to San Francisco or New York or LA and were at some job. And what did they want to do? Well, they wanted to go out after work. They wanted to explore the city. Some of them wanted to write about and sort of blog about their experience. And a lot of them were working at like Bank of America, sitting in front of a computer all day. So they were happy to be on the Yelp talk board or write a review every morning with their coffee. So that was sort of the audience. And what we found is they actually wanted to meet one another and go to happy hour and have these events. And so Nish, who was the first community manager at Yelp, basically started to meet the users and connect with the users in person just to see what they were up to. And that eventually led to this whole sort of street marketing team where we would have events and in-person events. And that drove the community. And I could, get all into that, but it was definitely part of the secret sauce.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And I guess when did it become this formal thing of Yelp Elite? And I think what's so interesting too is like you branded your evangelists, right? Which is amazing. And then there was like this badge of honor to be a Yelp Elite, and you get the little badge and all that stuff. But then there was this flywheel of growth. It seemed like, where it's like Yelp Elites are telling their friends, they're writing reviews, that leads to the SEO, then it brings in the next user, then it brings in the next person. Can you talk, like, was that like a happy accident, or was that very purpose built of that sort of flywheel of evangelist to review to SEO? How did the company sort of think about that at the time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all started with like the classic story of like, go talk to your users, right? So people were writing reviews. It was a bit of a surprise because that wasn't the first version of the product. The first version of the product was you would email your friends and ask them for a recommendation. They would then write that recommendation, and then the answers would get indexed and become searchable for the general population. And what we found out through the process of building that, and this was really Jeremy and Russ at the time, the founders, they gave people the ability to write a review without being asked. And that's the thing that took off, not the actual core product of emailing your friends, because it wasn't that better than just emailing your friends. But a certain group of people just started writing reviews, and they were doing it like every single day, writing reviews. So Nish was like, I need to go talk to these people. Jeremy was like, we should go talk to these people. And that's really where the idea started of, wow, these are interesting people. They're not actually tech early adopters. They're more people who are interested in the city and going out and exploring the city. And they're that person who plans brunch every Sunday, right? And so, we found out that that was sort of the 1% of the user generated content was going to come, or the 99% was going to come from the 1%. So then it was like, how do we find more of these people? And really the only way to do that was to actually be in the city. And so we ended up hiring and having community managers on the ground in every single city at one point, like almost all across the world. So that was sort of how we acquired the center of the bullseye. And then, as you said, they would tell their friends, they would invite their friends to the parties that we would have. So if you were part of Yelp Elite, you got a +1, which means you got to invite a friend. And some of those +1s then ended up becoming reviewers themselves. And that's kind of how it started. So it was very much a street marketing in the field grind, if you will, to grow an online community. But it became really predictable and really repeatable, as you said, because the SEO element to it. And I will say that was the one thing that was, the marketing thing was sort of interesting and a discovery along the way. But the SEO was very clear strategy from day one. And the team was incredible there from an SEO perspective. And you have to remember, this was before Google Maps even existed. So it was like, if you were searching for a dentist in San Francisco on Yelp, Google Maps didn't even exist. So you were getting Yelp links all the way down the line. So it was sort of the golden age of SEO, if you will.